It's time for our CMS Insider segment. I wish we had. Oh, Scott. Good to have you.
Wisecracking again.
You ready now?
Listen, I was ready at the beginning of the show. I was ready in the middle of the show. I'm ready at the end of the show. Let's go.
Your subject today in your CMS Insider segment, open source versus closed source. More specifically, should people be taking open source seriously?
Yeah.
What are you talking about here?
I think that is the question. It's not, one versus the other per se so much. I think that the notion, listen, here was the catalyst for this and why it came up. I was doing some, as I do, some advisory days with some of the kind of top folks in a number of the really large closed source organizations, as you want to call them, who might be up and to the right. And they're very dismissive of the kind of open source movement and what's happening there and not taking it seriously at all. And so my point to them was, no, in fact, you really do need to be taking this seriously. There's an awful lot of movement there. They're going to take an awful lot of your market share. And so I wanted to spend some time here at the end of the show to talk about just kind of open source in general and give a new framework for people to think about it.
So the companies that are being dismissive, the up and to the right companies, the big boys.
That's right.
Right?
Up and to the right, by the way, of any quadrant. We happen to be talking about a WCM quadrant, but name your one. I think they're dismissive.
Okay, so do they have their heads in the sand? Or is this a naivete on their part?
I think it is naive. I think what they need to go do is understand and study kind of what Clayton Christensen called disruptive innovation and the theory of disruption and what that is. Essentially, which is that kind of by way of the fact that they cost what they cost, when I say they, I'm talking about these up and to the right companies, that they tend to focus on an audience that is getting smaller and smaller over time. It becomes you start to cater your product and features and capability to the biggest company customers that you have, essentially, who are the ones who are forcing your hand and kind of innovating and kind of getting more and more and more sophisticated and specific, But by doing that, you essentially dismiss or leave open to your competitors the kind of larger body of an audience who could potentially make use of these sorts of tools. And so you open yourself up to competition by creating a more and more sophisticated product that becomes more and more expensive. And the delta between what your products can do and what your average customer is actually doing with it only grows.
So if those companies are not taking open source seriously, in your opinion, or seriously enough, who is taking open source seriously?
I think this is what the threat is. The threat is, and by the way, I'm going to get a lot of, people are going to beat me up about being, oh, you're waving the open source flag.
What else is new?
I'm just telling you what disruption theory says, which is you go look at the web, go to Built With, and I mean, how much of in the CMS space, for example, are people using, I think WordPress is 40-something% of the web today. And by the way, that which is not in that 40% is either on other open source platforms for the most part, or they're on no platform whatsoever. But they're not necessarily these big, huge names that we think about when we talk about big enterprise tools. So those who are taking it seriously is the average buyer out there. And by the way, that buyer is having to pay less and less and less as these capabilities get more and more commoditized, thus eating into the potential of the big boys.
I think I dropped the lead on this one from the start, so I'll go back to it. Why should the people in this room, the people watching CMS Connected, why should this matter to them, this debate?
I think there are very few, when I say very few, I'm saying relatively few, folks who actually need some of the very sophisticated capabilities of some of the very top tools, the most expensive tools. Now, that might be everybody, by the way, in this room, I guess, but I'm talking to the masses generally that there are few relative to the folks out there that actually need those very sophisticated capabilities, and there are an awful lot more alternatives every single day from mid-market players, lower market players, open source players who are basically coming in with lower prices. We should not view price or the nature of whether or not a license is open source or not as whether or not it's capable of handling your needs.
Nice job, Scott.